try to set some direction and give some guidelines, some suggestions, and that there will be that opportunity to follow through during the next 6 weeks of the Lenten series. The handout ought to be helpful to you as a memory aid. As I said before, I will not be following that outline, but the material I use will be taken from it, and therefore you might recognize it, or when you go back over it, you'll find it if you're looking for that. The whole idea is to give you something to hang on to, or some clear directions for improving prayer life and so on throughout this Lenten season. I'm doing this same lecture again in mini form on Friday at my brother's place downtown at Trinity Church. I always do a Lenten series. I'm doing just one lecture down there. If you're here tonight, don't go to my brother's place Friday, because it's the same lecture that I'm giving, only in a half-hour version. However, one way you could leave now and catch the half hour. Save all kinds of time. I also gave this lecture last Tuesday night. 25 people showed up, so we had sort of a dry run in the practice session. We didn't get the word out to everyone that we had canceled this. We canceled it because we couldn't get a room large enough for on campus Tuesday night. That's why we changed it to tonight. I think that's enough by way of background. I did plan on a long session tonight. I figured on going until 9:30, so you might keep that in mind, and there will be periodic breaks throughout. I'm going to use sort of a case study approach to this, and the cases are composites. In other words, I'll be talking about examples of people that I've talked to and trying to help them deal with the spiritual life in one way or another. One thing to begin with, the lecture is entitled A Structured Approach to Spirituality. Now, a lot of people have heard me talk before about something else that I call a situational approach to spirituality. And that is something that I don't want to lose sight of throughout all of this time. There's a lot of people who might listen to what I have to say tonight and say, that's not me, I can't do that, I don't have time, or I'm not built that way, or one thing or another, it doesn't fit my personality or character. And I think it's important to legitimate that right away. I believe that in the spiritual life we have to find things that really work for us. We have to find methods that are practical. My mentor, Carl Rahner, says that if it's impossible to do, you're not required to do it. Which I always thought was one of the wiser sayings from Father Rahner. Thus, we can't set for ourselves impossible kind of goals. Now, there's a lot of people at the end of this thing tonight going to say, I can't do any of that. Structured approach. That's okay, because I think there is a legitimate situational approach to spirituality and to Lent. And the situational approach works like this, that we let life and situations in life dictate our spiritual program. It's as simple as saying, I don't have 15 minutes today to pray, but while driving to work in the car, I leave the radio off, I try to do a little reflecting. It's as simple as hearing an honest compliment, and instead of being embarrassed by it, just say to the Lord, thank you. It takes 1.3 seconds to do. And one do that, whether it has time to do this approach or not. And I can multiply it. There's all kind of ways to improve our spiritual life, just an ad hoc basis. It just comes up as a result of what goes on. And so someone's got a headache coming on, and they sound to breathe deeply for 5 minutes and pray to God while they do it. So we can use life to deepen our spiritual life. And I don't want to lose that tonight. That's counterpoint to what I'm saying. And I believe that for most of us, many of us, that becomes almost the staple diet of our spiritual growth. And I want to, legitimate that. I think for a lot of us that's important. But there is the other side, and that is the structured approach to spirituality. That is, that sense, the I'm building throughout. In other words, if your best advice turns out to be case number 1, well then you could get up and leave at that point, and we could move on with them. So someplace all of us will probably get left behind here, and that's fine. We listen to it in the sense of, well, maybe there's a next stage for me. I'm not ready yet, but maybe I could move there someday. Enough by way of background, and try to get on here with these cases. The first case is a gentleman, middle-aged fellow, who's suffering from the blahs. He senses that his marriage is in trouble in some ways. He's a man of prayer, but he senses that there must be more to it. He remembers when he grew up and went through the Catholic schools and so on, he learned the Our Father and the Hail Mary, and he says those prayers. He says them the night before he goes to bed, 3 Our Fathers and 3 Hail Marys, and it's a regular part of his routine. But when he gets down to it, he wonders, well, what am I really doing there? And when they talk about prayer and improving prayer life, I don't really have a clue as to what they're talking about. I don't really understand any of that. So my task is to try to respond to this in some way and to help him to improve. That's why he's come to see me. Now, first of all, I want to offer him some sort of a theological perspective. I want to try to tell this busy man who's got a lot of demands on his time and so on, and deals well with numbers and figures and efficiency and so on, that there is more to the human person than that kind of calculative thinking, that we are indeed spiritual creatures. And to say we're spiritual creatures means 2 things to me. One is that we have the ability to reach beyond, that we always run into limits, but we can go beyond them. We got a desire for something more in life. We're not really satisfied with what we have at any stage, so we're able to transcend any of the limits we find in life. It's the first thing I mean by saying we're spiritual creatures. The other thing that there's some handouts in the back there for those people. The other thing I mean is that we have the ability to withdraw into ourselves, to sort of step back from life and say, what's it all about? To come inside, to find something deeper in our own heart, to be able to distance ourselves, in a sense, from our life, our job, our relationships, and to ask questions like, what's it all about? Where does it fit? And what am I doing? And so on. So that's one theological perspective. I want to tell the guy, yeah, you're doing a good job of putting the bread on the table, but there's a depth about life that I think you need to encounter to get in touch with in one way or another. And a second theological perspective I want to offer to the fellow is something about God. I want to tell them that we can't control that God. That we could say 6 Our Fathers and 6 Hail Marys before we go to bed at night, but we can't make that God do what we want done. That God is not going to automatically salvage his marriage just because he says more prayers or even improves his prayer life. This God remains ultimately mysterious, beyond our control and our ability to grasp, beyond all of our images. So whatever he's going to do with his prayer life, he can't forget that. God is ultimately beyond our abilities to control or grasp or even understand. Now, one of the first things I want him to do in order to get beyond this superficiality is to do some spiritual reading. I want him to read something other than the business magazines that he reads regularly. And I want him to do that in order to begin to get in touch with this deeper world. Now, fortunately, minutes of this each day, if he's able to work this out. I think that is going to help to nourish his spiritual life and get him into some of this deeper sense. Now, I'm going to ask him at times to read the Bible, but I can't ask him to sit down and read it, so I got suggestions for him, as you see there. Some questions for him to keep in mind. He can sit down and read a gospel in about 25 minutes, and I want him to ask himself, well, what picture of Jesus is there? If I ask myself, well, I pretend like I don't know anything about Jesus, and I'm to read Matthew's gospel, what picture emerges? So I got a lot of other suggestions there, that ways to read the Bible that might allow him to get at these deeper questions. One general way that I think is good is to always ask ourselves, what human problem was this author of this book thinking about or pondering that caused him to write the way he did? That's a general approach to the Scriptures that I think is usually helpful. What human problem was Paul wrestling with in his letter to the Romans, chapter 8, that we also wrestle with in our lives? General kind of question. Then I have other suggestions there for people who maybe need a commentary to read along and so on. So as you can see, the whole idea that you can tell you how much it costs and so on. Again, that whole practical character to this thing. Then I might ask them to try some of the spiritual classics, and they're listed there. One of my favorites, of course, would be Encounters with Silence, that's found in Ronner's book there, Prayers for a Lifetime. But those are some of the books that have influenced people throughout the years and made a difference, and you might want to check out some of those. Then, figuring that a lot of people don't like to read the stuff I like to read, I asked Sue Blair and Barbara Carter Daly to write down some of the books that they like and to annotate it. So now you have a long list of books here that one might want to read. And I'm not going to go through all of those, but somebody who decides they want to pick up on this side of it, take that home and read through the annotation and say, yeah, this one might be good for me, and we'll make use of it. So that's my first approach to this fellow. You see, my sense is that life is being lived too superficially, that he doesn't have a feel for the deeper things of life, and that's why his prayer is 3 Hail Marys and 3 Our Fathers without much thought. Now, the next thing I want him to do is to develop a little deeper kind of way of praying. I want to try to tell him what prayer is in a way that he can understand and doesn't have to read all of these other books. And my way of saying it is that prayer is nothing more than a meditative kind of thinking, which is sort of nudged towards a relationship with God. So I don't have to give him some esoteric kind of thing from John of the Cross. I say, look, if you can think, you can pray. You think all the time, and therefore you ought to be able to pray. You just slant it a bit towards some sort of recognition of who God is in this. If people are wondering, I don't know if it's a good idea to tell you where I'm at in the outline or not. This is, I guess my thought was it's better to listen. But what I'm going to say is in the notes. It's under the Thomistic form of prayer that I'm talking about here. But anyway, and I get this from my own mentor, John Macquarie, that prayer is a kind of thinking. But I got to get him to think in some other way than he thinks at work. At work, he thinks in a calculative way. We got a problem to solve, and we got to get it solved, and therefore we take these 3 measures, and we'll get it solved. And I say that's good thinking at work, but we need for this prayer another kind of thinking, that some authors have called meditative kind of thinking. This thinking goes easier, slower. We let the things run around in our head. We don't try to solve problems. We sort of more wrestle with mysteries. We are sort of quiet and patient I do. It's to reverse the process of thinking where we drink it in, where we go on the author's turf. We go allow the text or the thoughts to influence us rather than forming them. Carl Rogers says that that's one of the marks of maturity, that we're able to drink in reality without screening it all out. Always it's got to be my way, my categories. It's the same way like listening to this lecture. There's two ways to listen to it. One is with sort of a receptive mind to drink it in. The other is with a more critical mind that sets a grid there and says anything that doesn't fit my grid won't come in. Anything that I can't slot immediately, I reject because it's not my way of thinking. And I think a lot of times the kind of thinking that will help us pray better is if we can become more receptive, a meditative, slower kind of thinking that I am suggesting here. It's a thinking that's open to what I'm feeling as well as what my reason is telling me. Now, what do I want him to think about? Well, simple. I want him to think about his life. He doesn't have to jump off into heavenly realms someplace. All I want him to do is think about his life, his relationships, so on. So one thing I want him to do is begin to think about his responsibility. He has a responsibility to his wife and to his children. Oh, that's, and now when you let that flow in his head, you say, yeah, that's good. You know, I can't let my business dominate me. I got to think about my wife. She should be up there in the priorities and so on. I got to get her there. And I got to spend time with my kids. Now, in doing that, this becomes the nudge then. I want him to nudge his thinking towards the divine. In other words, one way of doing it is to say, what's the source of those obligations? Well, I said before God on my wedding day that I would make this marriage work. Now God is in the picture. Now the open source of the responsibilities is this one that we don't control, that touches me in the depths of my heart. So I want him to think like that about responsibilities. Also, I want him to think about the good things that have happened in his life. Oh, I want him to think about the blessings, the good times that he's had in his family, the times with his kids that have been very satisfying to him. And I again want him to nudge that in to what we call the prayer of gratitude. Well, it's a simple jump from saying, boy, that was great, when the kids and I were talking the other day and we were laughing and they seemed, we seemed to be in good terms and everything. It's a simple step to say thank you. And that thank you is directed then towards this one that we end up calling God. I want him to think as well compassionately, to think about people who are less fortunate, people who need help in his life. That could be the people closest to him, could be people in the community as a whole. And to nudge that towards prayer of petition, which can become as simple as, Lord, help them. Be with those people. Don't let those people be alone. And I would finally want him to think about his longings, his ideals, how he'd like his marriage to be, how he'd like to be a force for good at work, how he'd like to be a role model for his children. Well, and the beauties, the longings of the heart. And out of that, I would like him to sort of slant that towards a prayer of praise to God. The God who lets us dream beautiful dreams. And the God who's put those longings in our heart for relationships that are beautiful and warm and comfortable. Okay. think, you can pray. And all you got to do in your thinking is quiet the mind and heart and think in a more patient, receptive kind of way, and then nudge it towards the God who's always present in our lives and always around and who's there with help and support. And how are we going to nourish this then? We're going to nourish it because he's going to do this spiritual reading, and he's going to have these sort of deeper thoughts in his heart. Okay, that's the first case and the first way of going. Now, as with all these, I'm going to pause for just a couple minutes and ask you to talk about this and to see what elements of this make sense to you and any of it that might be useful. Let's take just 2 minutes to find a friend close. Let me see if anyone has a question they want to ask about that. Okay, maybe questions will occur as we go along, and let's see. Now, the next case is an older woman who comes in and says that she's pretty much into prayer. You know, she goes to Mass 4 times during the week. She says rosary most days. She likes the Stations of the Cross and said devotion when they have it, and she goes when it's being done at church. She wants some ways to improve her prayer, to do better during the night, but right away says, I don't want any of that new stuff. A little older, you know, and pretty set in my ways, and I don't want you, you know, like going to the golf pro. I don't want you to revamp the whole swing. Make slight revisions in the swing. Can't redo the whole thing here. So, need to try to see what we can do with this case now. Well, the first thing that I want to say again out of a theological perspective is that the God we believe in and the kind of persons we think we are called always to grow. And no matter what our stage of life is, there's always some new possibility opened up for us. That's one of the things that keeps life interesting. It always fascinates me why some people get fixated at a certain stage and other people grow. You look around and see it all the time. Oh, I mean, some people, they get to a point and that's it. It's like you shut off. Like, I don't want to hear anything new the rest of my life. You know, I don't want to be jarred out of anything here. And everyone's got their point, you know, where it seems like there's a shutdown. Yet, I know some other people, and I see some of them here, as a matter of fact, who are sort of examples or models to me of people who stay open. And I think it's a beautiful quality, but the trick is to figure out how to do it oneself. I keep wondering, where will that shutdown point come? That fixation. And I think the theological point that's helpful is to remember that the God we believe in always opens new doors for us. That in any given stage of life, any situation, there are new possibilities that are present for us. And that's one of the ways we stay alive and keep our mind active, our heart growing and deepening and so on. First theological perspective to keep in mind. And a reminder of that, you know, growth is still possible at any time. God calls us to do that. Then I want to go back with her to some of the things that Christ taught about prayer. Just to remind, thinking through the scriptures, and we see what did Jesus have to say about prayer. Well, one of the things he suggested is that we keep it sort of short and simple and not multiply a lot of words. That might be worth thinking about. Another thing he said is that when we pray, it should have a childlike quality. That the children seem to have a trust that he raises up for us here that would be a good way to think about our prayers. He also suggested that we be persistent. That we not stop praying just because it doesn't feel good or we don't want to or it's getting hard or it's arid or dry or whatever. Be persistent in prayer. Keep going after these things. And that we should pray with a forgiving heart. We should be, it will be hard to pray if we're really angry at people. And refusing to forgive people will probably be difficult to really commune with God in any way. And finally, that the Lord gave us a very concrete, practical way of praying, an example in the Lord's Prayer, a very traditional prayer. And I tell her that as an affirming thing to her. You know, you're right. We don't maybe need all these newfangled methods, you know. Let's stay with the fundamentals here. Let's go back to that Lord's Prayer, which is part of your everyday prayer. You say it at Mass, you say it when you say your rosary, and so on. Let's look at that. Okay, now, to some theological perspectives to keep in mind. Now to the sort of practical advice that I would want to give. How are we going to improve without revamping the whole golf swing here? How are we going to refine to make it a little bit better? So the first thing I would do is go back to that Lord's Prayer and suggest that sometimes when you say that Lord's Prayer, say it very slowly, and as you're going along, if one of the phrases hits you, like you're supposed to forgive others, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive. Geez, and then just stay with it for a while. Don't think you got to say 5 of these Our Fathers. Say one, say it slowly, and think about, meditate on the phrase that strikes you. Or you could alternate that and say, one day I'll try to concentrate on the first phrase and then the next phrase and so on. There'd be a lot of ways of doing it. The point is to be more reflective in each of those petitions in the Lord's Prayer. And then as far as her saying of the Rosary, I suggest a number of things. One is that she concentrate on the mysteries, the 15 mysteries that go with these 15 decades, the sorrowful, joyful, and glorious mysteries, and that she makes sure that she takes just a few seconds before starting the mystery, you know, the first glorious mystery, the resurrection. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to think about that. Resurrection. And get it in mind. And then say the Hail Marys as sort of a backdrop, like having the stereo on. Or don't think about the words of the Hail Mary. Just say them as a repetitious kind of prayer, but keep your mind fixed on the resurrection and what that means to you. Might be a way of saying this rosary in a little deeper way. Another way of improving the rosary would be to concentrate one's attention. Maybe say the first decade for a member of one's family. Or think about 5 people that are important to you. And with each decade, take a few seconds beforehand, stop and think, think about my daughter here and how she's doing, and I'll offer this for her, that she'll be able to do a good job in her life. Could vary that and have a whole series of people. Some people have suggested that maybe if you got a lot of people you got to pray for, you could have each Hail Mary be one person. You get 50 people prayed for here. And that's a lot, but you could just think, it would be simple, right beforehand, think of the people and to offer that prayer for them. Another way of doing it, and this is interestingly enough suggested by the American bishops, that maybe we should add mysteries. Because the rosary isn't very good. It's sort of got these 15, but it misses a whole lot. Mostly the life of Christ. We could go through and say, set up a whole new series of mysteries to get it going and say, well, I'm going to meditate now on Jesus with the woman at the well. Or Jesus with the Gerasene demoniac. Or Jesus while he's giving a particular parable, the sowing of the seed. So one could enrich the rosary by coming up with a whole bunch of new mysteries that would enable one to think about other parts of was a time at the Second Vatican Council when people thought, well, maybe that's sort of a childish way of praying and so on. I don't think that. Repetitive prayer is found in most religious traditions. And there's something very valuable about the fingering of the beads and the repetition. It's calming. It very often helps shut down the left rational brain and release the right brain. And it's a way of keeping one's focus and so on. So since it has been in the tradition, I expect it to come back. I always tell the story that way of Karl Rahner, my mentor when he lectured at the University of Chicago back in 1974. And in the Rockefeller Church, I was there for the lecture, and he got up and he read the first paragraph of his lecture in German, much to the dismay of, 1,000 people or more gathered in the church. And after that, he finished the first paragraph and figured that was enough, and went and sat down. And while someone else got up and finished the lecture in English, and Carl sat down there, pulled out his rosary, and began saying his rosary there in front of 1,000 people, which seemed indeed to have a calming effect on him since he fell asleep at that. So, a number of points to that story. One is we got the most sophisticated theologian of the 20th century saying his rosary. It's one interesting thing. And also makes other points about its therapeutic values. The next point that I want to suggest to this woman is that she make an effort to get more out of the masses that she goes to. And one way that she might do that is read the readings over ahead of time, to have her own thoughts about them before she gets to church. Another thing she might do is read them with a commentary. One of the things mentioned in the list, I think Sue Dwyer came up with this, is Carol Stumiller's books on meditation. Meditations for Lent, for example, that's in the reading list that is in the handout. And he's our Murray lecturer, by the way. He's brought in here because he'll be here next Sunday evening standing in this very place. He's a very fine scripture scholar, and that's one of his great contributions to do these meditations for the masses. But that would be a way of preparing for those. And so that one gets more out of it when one is in the church. And then also it would be possible to work the other direction and say after one's in the church to think about those later on. Might try to do something with the Sunday readings and the homilies, so that one maybe would talk about them with family members afterwards. One could get in the car and say, well, he did it again, another crummy homily. If that proves to be a problem, that one is not finding nourishment, we have the Lenten answer for this. That is on my Sunday night Reflections radio program, which is also listed on this handout. It's got everything you want to know about Lent. Those will be meditations on the Sunday readings. And the first one will be done with Bishop Huffman, and with a series of people in the diocese here. And you see on this very last thing on the handout. So Sunday evenings, if you were at Mass and you didn't get anything out of it, you didn't pay attention to the readings, you got one more shot at it Sunday night. I think the bishop did a good job of that. Some of those 6 might not be as good as others, and maybe the host at times wasn't quite with it, so you might have to bring your own thoughts to that thing as well. Anyway, it's 10:30 Sunday evenings, WSPD AM video. You can listen and catch up on those readings, see maybe another slant that other people have on it. Can't get over how practical this is. Character for me. I hardly know how to do all of this. But anyway, so I've given advice to the lady. I'm not teaching her any wild, new, exotic prayer techniques. What I've tried to do, and this I think is good for all of us, is to take what she already does, the Lord's Prayer, the Rosary, the stations, I didn't say. My suggestion for her for the stations is that she adds the 15th station. That when she finishes the regular 14, that she spends a few more minutes thinking about the 15th station, the resurrection of Jesus, which puts all the rest of it in context. Reminds us that all of that suffering isn't just an end in itself. That human beings aren't made just to suffer, but that we are made to come closer to God, and that there's ways of making progress, and there's a positive outlook finally on the Christian message, so that the resurrection should be part of her praying at the stations to keep the heavy, dark part, crucifixion and so on, in some sort of proper Christian perspective. So the method is take the ordinary things we're doing and deepen in some way. As I'm saying that, and to end up, I think that it's back, I presume that's when people are here, the topic to say how are we all going to improve, and it's finding what that precise is for each one of us. Let's do the same we did before and do one discussion and see what you make of all that. Now the third in the series 6 case studies is now a collegian who comes to me, and this guy is very involved in many on campus. He's around all the time. He cut back on sleep. He doesn't have enough hours in the day to get everything done. He feels very put upon, heavy responsibilities on his shoulders. He's got to get his studies in. He's got a part-time job, and he's involved in student organizations, and it's all sort of getting home. It's very difficult to juggle all of these balls at one time. He's beginning to feel having trouble sleeping well at night. Feels pretty uptight a lot of times. Life feels frenzied, like he's in a rat race. It's hard to really stop it or to get hold of it in any way. I asked him about his prayer life, and he says, well, he goes to Mass pretty regularly on Sundays and all the time. And he grew up as a Catholic, and he tries to get there. Can't say he gets a lot out of it, but he's pretty faithful in attending. And he tries to talk to God sometimes throughout his busy day. It remains important to him. And again, he's looking for, how is he going to get his spiritual life in order here? How is he going to manage all of this? Now, one of the first things that, again, with the theological perspective that I want to suggest to him is to bring us back to Jesus Christ as the model for all of this. I want to speak to him about Christ as the best that we've produced, as the model for human existence. A human being like us in every way except sin, one who knew all of the struggles in life, who had his own problems in trying to deal with people, and whose cause was so hard to accomplish, to come into the kingdom, like us in all things. And I want to remind him that this busy man who went about preaching and had no place to lay his head and was constantly put upon by all these other people, that he used to go off by himself periodically and get away from the crowd and commune with the one he called Abba, Father. And then before the Gospels portray him, before he's taken on his toughest temptations and his most difficult times, he goes on a 40-day fast and prayer session out of the desert. 40 days to get ready to take on the evil one. Long before, when he sees his impending death, he goes off and he apart from even his closest friends. Wants to get away from his closest friends for a while, and he goes and prays to his Father. Possible, don't make me do this. But not my will, but thine be done. So I present to the young man Jesus Christ as a model of a mature, fulfilled person. I'm not talking to him so much about God, him as the Son of God, but as the best of the humans. And what did the best of the humans do? He combined an active and a contemplative life. He put together the quiet time with intense activity. He found a way that those two things fructified one another. If they weren't in opposition, he found his time to do it. And out of that found new strength to be able to carry on his mission. And his mission and his constant drain on his time and energy and so on threw him back on the prayer, on the contemplation. So I want to tell the young man that mature people try to accomplish that. That the model for a fulfilled person is not someone who can keep going forever in the rat race without ever stopping. That the real model is to put those two things together. So I got to change his thinking, you see, about what it means to be a really effective human being, a fulfilled man in the world. And I point to Christ as the example of this, but then I also want to say how this Christ model gets played out in other people who have been effective, who have gotten things done. I can look at some of the great people of our own time. Gandhi maybe being an example of someone who was so active and got things done and liberated the whole country and did it out of a rich, deep spiritual resource, out of a rich prayer life. You probably multiply those examples using Dorothy Day and other people like that. So I got a sell job here. I got to convince him of that. Then to move to the more practical advice I want to give him, one of the first things I want him to do is to attend to his bodiness. I want him to start to exercise regularly and to build that in so that this is part of the method of being able to sleep better so that he can function better. So I want him to do some exercise that he can do, not go play racquetball for an hour today and do that for 2 days and then never be able to find an hour to do that again. He's got to find an exercise that he can stick with regularly and that he won't slack off on. So exercise will be an important part of what he needs to do. And this is based on the notion of that we are whole people, that our bodiness plays such an important role in our prayer life and our whole spiritual development. It's not like I got a soul that I got to develop apart from the body. No, I am a whole person. I must attend to my spiritual side as well as my physical side. And just as I wanted the businessman with the middle age with the problems to attend to his spiritual side, I want this young man to get in touch with his bodily. So we need regular exercise. The next thing that I want to impress upon him or teach him in one way or another is the importance of silence. That he's just got to learn to shut off the stereo and the TV and the noise and stop the telephone calls and just be quiet with himself for a while. Now, I'll tell him that some people crave that. There's some busy people that crave that time. They need to find ways to get it. There's one of the books mentioned in the outline is called Behind Closed Doors. And the author in the preface asks you to guess why the title, Behind Closed Doors, for a book on prayer. And almost no one ever gets it. Why behind closed doors? And he said, well, in going out and giving talks on prayer, he found many, many people who said the only way they could get quiet time was in the bathroom. So he titled his book Behind Closed Doors. It's a place where many people can get away from it all and just be quiet and get some in. So I want to tell the young man, some people crave silence. Other people are afraid of it. If you're at Mass and the priest takes a full minute of silence, you can almost feel the negative vibrations of the people who find that extremely uncomfortable. 1 minute of silence. She's going to get on. But there's a deeper reason why silence is uncomfortable. Because silence puts us in touch with ourselves. Once you start blocking out the noise and everything else and the inner dialogues, then we eventually rest within ourselves. And for many people, that's scary. Because all of us are composed of both positive and negative elements. There's things that we like about ourselves and things we don't like. The silence allows those negative feelings, thoughts, perceptions to come to conscious awareness. And that is very frightening. It produces great angst in many people. But if we're going to move ahead to a deeper stage of prayer, it seems to me there's actually no way to do it without that silence. Now, my suggested exercise, young man, and for all of us is to put ourselves where we got to be quiet, no phones, TV, stereo, and so on, and then try to be quiet. Now, what almost everyone will find out is that a dialogue starts. You start dialoguing with somebody else, like, what will I say to Mabel when I call her up? Late afterwards. That goes on. Then an inner dialogue. Then once you screen out those other people, then an inner dialogue starts. It's hard to know who we're talking to, but we're talking to ourselves. And then that can be pretty intense too. Like, why did you do that, you dummy? That was really stupid. You were stupid. It was interesting. I was who are we talking to? But that inner dialogue has to be quiet as well. And then there's a next stage that some people have never known in their life, that because they've never gone those first two stages, that is really silence. And that's when the scary starts. When I thought about it being scary, since it's scary and you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe because you never did the first steps. Because the next step can be scary, because that's when we are not confronting the known. We're with deeper things of life. We're moving our true self, moving towards that one unnameable, imaginable, the one we call God. The saints say when they got into that it was scary. It's a frightening part of all that. But we got to get in silence. I want a young man that started his early age, and I got to sell to him. Yeah. And to say, no, this being quiet is good for you. It's good for you. It does a lot of things. It'll help jangle your nerves. Noise creates a lot of that. Just get away from the noise for a while, you can take a couple deep breaths, and maybe the nerves will start to calm down a little bit. Silence helps to see things whole. Sort of things just jumping in, that's all. They can start to get perspective on things. We begin to... Thomas Merton said that silence is the mother of truth. We have to be quiet before we begin to see the deeper, truer things about life. Silence prepares us to think better, more clearly, and to speak more truly. It's one theory that, good speech, the way we avoid triviality and just foaming at the mouth, just covering up every little bit of silence and conversation with inane talk, is to learn to be silent. We probably will become better conversationalists if we spend 15 minutes in silence. That might sound like an odd thing to say, but I believe it's true. We will talk better because we're able to listen better, and because we don't then get compulsive about having to fill in every second that isn't noisy, or isn't filled with speech. So, and finally, the other good thing this does for us is really to deepen our prayer, because when we get silent and listen well, then we are in the presence of God. And this prepares us then for sort of wordless prayer, or being simply resting in the presence of the loving God. It would be the way two people who love one another, and not necessarily still in falling in love romantic stage, but just two people who are comfortable with one another, who care for one another, can be in the same room without saying a word to one another and feel very at ease and satisfied with that. praying first thing in the morning before he gets into this rat race. Maybe praying at night where you can sort of reflect on what it was all about. But he needs a definite time. It won't happen. He's too busy. The theory being, we find time for the things we think are important. I got to convince him that this is important, or he's going to have he's going to break down. He's going to have the law of diminishing returns. It's going to be less effective. I got to convince him of that. Once I convince him, then it's important. Then he's going to take the time and do it. And he's going to have a set time, set place, and other things like posture and methodology and so on. And then what I want him to do when he's there in his place and in his time is I want him to do centering prayer. And people who've heard me lecture know I've often talked about this. It's very important in my own life. I learned it from J.D. Salinger, author of Catcher in the Rye, also the author of Franny and Zooey, many years ago, a long, long time ago, when Salinger talked about the Jesus prayer. It was done in the Eastern monasteries. It's done, people know it, who spend $125 for TM know it. Same thing, transcendental meditation. In fact, all religious traditions have this kind of centering prayer. It's going to become more popular in Christian circles these days with Thomas Merton and some of his ideas. There's many ways of doing it. I think that Jesus prayer I have in the notes, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That was the Jesus prayer said most time in the Eastern monasteries. And their idea was they wanted to take seriously the idea of pray always. So they figured that if they tuned prayer to their breathing, they would always be praying because they were always breathing. So they tried to get the prayer in sync with their breathing. Became known as the Jesus prayer. Now, I will tell you the simple way that I try to do this, and there's on different methodologies, but I would try to get my place and sit in the same place always. I would use a sitting posture, one that's comfortable, feet on the floor, two hands in lap, eyes closed. Breathe in through the nostrils. Be aware of the breath coming in. Breathe deeply at first, and then as I would let my breath out, I would say my own mantra or ejaculation or short prayer, which is, my Lord and my God. And every time I would let my breath out, breathe in, conscious, just in my own mind, and I would have an image that goes down and centering. It's like, my Lord and my God. And God sort of just sinks down into one's entrails. The imaging helps me. And the way you do the prayer and all the centering prayers, you simply repeat it with your breathing. Now, in some forms, you say half of it while you're breathing in and half while you're breathing out. There's a lot of variations of it, and I think it's important for people to experiment with it. But I want the young man to try that, to do it for 2 weeks, 15 minutes a day, and not try to make anything happen. Don't do anything else, but try to say your mantra or your little prayer every time you let your breath out. In fact, if he finds trouble concentrating, I'll challenge him to get 30 in a row, like this. My Lord and my God, 1. My Lord and my God, 2. Challenge him to get 30 in a row. But if his mind goes off in other directions, then I would say just be gentle and patient with yourself and just gently bring it back. My Lord and my God. Now, I got variations. One of the things I will do is keep a pad of paper next to me because one of the things this does is release your right brain. Shut off the left brain, the rational side, release the creative side. So if you do it, you're going to get thoughts, creative thoughts. And that's one of I would prepare a homily, for example, is to read the readings and read the commentaries or the background or whatever else, and then start meditating. And then what will happen for me very often is the ideas will come together and begin to form into some sort of coherent pattern. And what I would like to do is when those thoughts come, or even when they are simply mere distractions, yep, I should call so-and-so, write it down on the pad, clear the mind, and go back to the mantra. Which is, again, as you can see, the purpose of this meditation is to clear the mind, to move it aside, to get rid of the distractions. I just figured before I learned this that if I had 15